Around 6 months ago, I made a tier list where I ranked the difficulty of the Americas in Geoguessr. However, I only based it on how hard it is to identify the country. So this time we are also going to take into account region guessing and how big the country is. And we have a new country since then in Panama. Now this is mostly going to be based off of no moving, but I will mention NPZ when necessary. And Panama no moving is basically 100% free, just because of the car. And even without the car, it's fairly unique landscape wise, very tropical, very hilly, so it shouldn't be too bad either way. And in terms of region guessing, for one, it's a small country, so it doesn't matter too much. And there is some weird car antenna meta and everything which you can learn if you want, so even then it's not too difficult. So I'm going to put it in free. Uruguay is also pretty simple. For one, it's a very small country, so you're never going to get a bad score if you get it correct. And in terms of recognizing it, you're only really going to get it mixed up with Argentina, but even then, it's got quite a few unique things. It's got the trident poles, it's got the thick wooden posts, it's got the Gen 3 black car everywhere, the cloudy weather, and after a while of playing, it really doesn't become too difficult to recognize. However, it's not free by any means, so I'm going to put it in easy. And now we have the main one, the United States. So, if we're just talking about, this also keeps in mind how easy they are to learn and how many resources there are, how likely it is for you to learn, the metas and everything. And the US would be one of the best countries in terms of how much you can learn. That being said, that does not make it easy at all. So here are a few things that you can learn about the US. You can learn the plates, you can learn the highway shield, you can of course learn the landscape, you can learn, now you have light reflectors, you have bollards, you have state flags if you really want. But all of these things take quite a while to learn, keeping in mind that there are 50 states. And I mentioned landscape, even then that can often be deceiving, because if you see a desert, that could be anywhere from southern New Mexico to inland Washington. Like, even that isn't completely consistent. However, since it is such a large country, a lot of the time you may be able to get around just with the landscape, but it isn't the most reliable thing. And that's not even the whole problem. The other half of the problem is Canada. The US and Canada have a long history of people getting them mixed up in 50-50s. A lot of the time, if there's no signage or anything, it's borderline impossible, especially if you're on the border. I put it in average the last time, but it's definitely going in hard now. Dominican Republic. Not too much to talk about here. There's only coverage in 2 cities, Santo Domingo and Santiago de los Caballeros, so you're never going to be too far away either way. The general rule is that if you see palms, you go in Santo Domingo, and if you see mountains, you go in Santiago. And of course, not to mention the unique Gen 3 Google car with the roof racks and the stuff in them. And with that, last time I put it in free, and I'm pretty confident in putting it in free again. And of course, no country is free per se, but within this context, this is how I'm going to rate them. Now, I could have added Northern Mariana Islands, US Virgin Islands, and other territories, but I think Puerto Rico is just the most common and one you'll encounter the most, so that's what I'm going to talk about. I put it in free last time, which I definitely do not agree with. Well, first of all, to recognize it, like the other territories, it's got the antenna on the side of the car, and it's all in Gen 3. But that's about it. Oh, and also what's unique about it is that they speak Spanish, but they've got no front plates, which is unique to them besides Dominican Republic sometimes. However, the reason it's not free is because you can easily get it mixed up with other territories sometimes, especially if you don't see many clues or any language. Not too much else to say, so it's going in easy. Peru is a difficult country to region guess. Identifying it isn't the worst, like the landscape with all those mountains is very unique. You got the unique black and white signposts. You got a lot of Gen 4 there now, so you won't get it mixed up as much with Ecuador and Bolivia. However, again, as I said, region guessing it, there's just simply not too much to work with. Last time I put it in easy, yeah, because it's fairly easy to recognize, but when you consider region guessing, I think it's overall a hard country. Mexico's pretty similar to the US in that you have a lot of different things to learn if you want. You got plates, you sometimes have bollards, you got unique signs, you got Tabasco stickers, and most importantly, you got landscape. Landscape is by far the most important thing if you want to region guess in Mexico. Recognizing it is sometimes difficult. It's a part of the classic Latin American roulette plus the US sometimes. However, it's the only Latin American country that uses alto, which is useful. It's in the northern hemisphere, which sometimes helps. So I think overall it's a just average country to guess in. I always have to mention this quickly, but Guatemala is another unique Google car country, and I also should have said this earlier. With roof rack cars, with American Territory cars, or other unique Gen 3 cars, they have a square blur at the back of them. So even on an NPZ, you should be able to tell it's a unique car of some sort. But besides that, they have the poles painted, I think it's yellow at the bottom. They have the single yellow line. They have a lot of mountains. You got some flat parts. The landscape isn't too difficult to recognize, and it's a small country with limited coverage. So region guessing it is also fairly manageable. And I think all of those reasons combined justify it being in free. Like if it's not too difficult to get an NPZ, then for no moving, it shouldn't be too bad. We have Ecuador next, and Ecuador has received quite the unfortunate demise over the past few months. I like to call it Gen 5, other people like to call it other things, so that has automatically made it a bit easier to guess if a map chooses to include it, which isn't always the case, but we're going to ignore that. I don't know what it is about Ecuador, but just over a while you do recognize it. I don't know whether it's something about the roads, the road lines, the mountains and cliffs, but there's just something unique about it in terms of being able to guess the country. Also, they spam bollards everywhere, which helps. However, where it gets difficult is region guessing it. I personally don't understand how you do it, but since it's not too difficult to individualize, I think it deserves to go in average. And make sure to subscribe if you'd like to see more of these. Geoguessr needs a lot more tier list videos in my opinion. But anyway, Costa Rica. Now, if you were to ask any player that started playing within the last 3 months or something, how many would say that they've had a Costa Rica round before? I think it's just one of those countries that has just phased out over time, which makes sense. It's all Trekker. I don't know if it even should be on this list anymore. I almost wanted to put it in easy because of how just obscure it is these days, but I'm gonna put it in free. Colombia is fairly difficult. In fact, I'm gonna say very difficult if you're just talking about rural Colombia, because if you're in a city, you see the Colombian crosses, you see the pares, you see the yellow plates. But if you're just in a field in the middle of nowhere, getting Colombia is not easy unless you see the Colombian fences. Also, region guessing it is also not very easy at all. It's just overall a hard country, not too much else to say. Chile, this is a good one. Since it's such a long country, region guessing is actually pretty fun. Like, you got the desert at the top, you got the tundra landscape At the bottom, in the middle, you got a mix of both. You got a few recognizable cities sometimes. It's just overall not too bad to region guess. And if you want to go meta-wise, there's the whole divide between Gen 3 and Gen 4, just like Argentina. There's the white car, which may sometimes get mixed up with Peru. But in general, it's a pretty fun country to go with. I'm going to put it... If you want to tell me easiest too high, I perfectly understand, but I think it's a pretty good country to guess in. Canada, for obvious reasons, has to be compared to the US. It's a little bit easier just because there's less overall coverage. And in my opinion, distinguishing the landscapes is a bit easier, along with having different signs and languages sometimes, of course, in New Brunswick and Quebec with the French and stuff like that. So this is a weird combination of there's a lot less to learn compared to the United States, but at the same time, it's going to be a bit harder to pinpoint as much like the United States. So this is a little bit harder. This is a little bit hard to rank, but I think just with all those reasons combined, it has to be at least a little bit earlier than the US. I think putting it on the level of Mexico is pretty fair. I put Brazil in easy last time, which is interesting. I definitely do stand by that it's not the hardest country to identify just by the red soil alone and a few other clues. Other unique things are the black backs of the signs. You got Portuguese, which really helps sometimes. The Brazilian poles is an obvious thing. The lack of bollards, the lack of a lot of straight roads. However, region guessing it is where, of course, the difficulty begins. There are some notable things you can remember, like the piranha plants is probably the most common one. You got the Tocantins long grass. You got the Sao Paulo mountains, and I really have not included moving in this at all. But if you're a moving player and you're in an urban location, Brazilian area codes, from what I've heard, are by far some of the most useful ones to learn. It's definitely not going in easy this time, but at the same time, it's not the hardest. Like, I think if you spent a decent amount of time learning it, it's not going to be the hardest. Compared to something like Colombia, for example, you're going to find way more metas and clues in Brazil. Bolivia is one of the main reasons I decided to redo this. In the thumbnail, I put it as impossible, and even in identifying the country, it's nowhere near the hardest one. I don't know why I put it there. Actually, no, I do, because for whatever reason that was my worst country at the time. But no, identifying it's not the. I will admit it's not the easiest. It's all Gen 3 white car. You can get it mixed up sometimes with Brazil and Peru, but it's got unique poles, it's got unique architecture. I haven't talked about architecture much, but it's got the unique, almost unique, I guess, old red brick buildings, amongst a few other things. And region guessing it, there is so little coverage. I'm sure I've seen people make videos where they learn every road or something. And whenever a country doesn't have too much coverage, region guessing it becomes just 10 times easier. So because of that, I think just objectively, I personally would put it in average, but I think more objectively, I'd have to put it in easy. I will spoil you now that nothing is going in the very hard tier. That will be reserved for other continents. If people are interested in that, of course. And for the last country, Argentina. The logical comparison in this case would be Chile, just because of their locations. I think it is a bit more difficult simply because it's a bigger country. But not only that, I think just region guessing it in general is a bit more difficult. A lot of it is just flat, a lot of it looks fairly similar. It gets a bit easier towards the north where you have all the mountains, you have the Misiones area, so it looks a bit different over there. A lot of it is rural, a lot of it is just straight roads everywhere. I think it's very similar to Chile, but just a little bit more difficult. So because of all that, I'm going to put it in average. And that's going to be all of them. This is the final ranking. Let me know what you think of it. Any form of support is appreciated. I'm working on a lot of different things at the moment. They will take a while, but hopefully they end up fairly well. And I'll see you soon.